We know what causes inflation. Government. You know, it's interesting. The private sector couldn't cause inflation if it wanted to. How would it do it? Private sector can't print money. If you borrow more than you can pay in the private sector, you go bankrupt. You might even go to prison. You got all kinds of Ponzi schemes. People are caught, they go to prison. But the biggest Ponzi scheme is the federal government and the way it steals money out of our trust funds. Social Security, Medicare have no money left in their trust funds. The Highway Trust Fund doesn't exist anymore. It exists in name, but they still stole the money out of there too. If every one of these members of Congress had to face the same thing the private sector faces, we'd put a crime tape right around the Capitol building and give them each at least 5 years for embezzlement, for fraud, for God knows what. But because they do it on your behalf, they're compassionate, they're righteous, and they're destroying the country. Now, way back last March, not this past one, the one before in 2021, we played on the radio show a small audio clip. Even before, it was about 2-3 weeks before they passed the so-called rescue plan with another 1.9 trillion or whatever the hell it turned out to be. And I said at the time that they have just sparked historic inflation, and because of what they're doing, they will destroy our energy sector and energy independence. That's long before the monster Putin invaded Ukraine. It's long before so much of what Biden blames on his problems or our problems, he blames on other people. He's no Harry Truman with the buck stops with him. For him, the buck stops with everybody else. That's the Biden doctrine. And so I want to start this, and I want to confront Mr. Reich. I can't confront him personally. He won't show up. We tried in the past, and so we stopped trying. So I'll confront him this way, as I have also in the past. Go.
Inflation. Everybody's talking about it, but ignoring one of its biggest causes, corporate concentration.
Now just stop for a minute. Corporate concentration. What exactly happened between the time that Donald Trump was president and Joe Biden was president? Did something happen with corporations? Was there more concentration or less concentration? No. Well, why didn't we have inflation under Donald Trump? I mean, inflation, so-called, was like, what was it, 2%, 3%? Interest rates, 2.5%, 3.5% tops if you didn't get a good rate. So this thing about corporate concentration is nonsensical. Nonsensical. And think about corporate concentration. Even if you had a concentration of oil companies, which we do not anymore, but you still need a lot of capital in order to invest in drilling and other aspects of oil production. It's a very complicated, very labor-intensive, very capital-intensive industry. It's not like setting up a computer company or something, or software company. You need some concentration, because you can't have 10,000 little companies. It doesn't work that way, even though we do have our independence. And there is significant concentration. But that said, the answer isn't there's too much private sector concentration. The answer is the centralized government. Because again, as I said, under Trump, we didn't have these issues. And keep something else in mind. We were drilling like hell under Trump. He opened up the Alaska reserves. And by the way, the Alaska reserves, the wildlife reserves, it sounds like, oh, that's for the wildlife. They set that up for drilling decades ago, half a century ago. They said all of the rest of Alaska is off limits to drilling. This one area, this reserve, you can drill. And now they've turned that into, no, that reserve, we got to protect that reserve. We would never have the pipeline in Alaska that we have now if these same people were in charge, quite frankly. We would not. But if you're shutting down pipelines, you're shutting down nuclear power plants, you're shutting down hydroelectric plants, you're shutting down fracking, you're shutting down offshore drilling, you're making it virtually impossible to actually drill on lands that you have leased. Oh, we've leased 9,000 leases. Yeah, but you don't give the licenses to drill. You're slow walking them. What do you think's going to happen? And if your ideology says, and they do, climate change, which is the degrowth movement, which grew out of Europe, which is a commie movement, anti-capitalist movement, the green movement means no movement. But we've got to move to new technologies. Well, which one? Where are these new technologies? Electricity. Well, we're going to have brownouts and blackouts now because we don't have enough electricity. Where does electricity come from? It doesn't come from that. What does it come from? Mostly fossil fuels, particularly coal. Now what do you do? Solar. Solar? Solar? Oh, yes, and wind. And wind? Yes. Less than 5% of our energy in this country. You see, this is the problem. These people don't think 2 minutes ahead. They're always transitioning. They're always transforming. They're always undermining. They always have the stirring the pot. That's what the Democrat Party stands for. That's what the American Marxist movement stands for. They don't appreciate what we have. They don't appreciate the complexity of society. And they don't appreciate how capitalism and freedom work. They're all about, I have the ideas, I know how things work, we're going to ignore history, and we're going to do what I say because I'm so smart. Go.
Undeniably rising. In response, the Fed is about to slow the economy, even though we're still at least 4 million jobs short of where we were before the pandemic.
4 million jobs short of where we were because of the pandemic. That's not why the Fed is going to, quote unquote, slow the economy. What the Fed is trying to do now, and they're late, they had their foot on the gas pedal even while the drunken Marxists in Congress, aka the Democrats and Biden, were spending and spending and spending. This is so predictable. Even some Democrat economists, Lawrence Summers and others, Diamond, who runs J.P. Morgan, another Democrat, they've all said it's inflation and we're definitely headed for a recession. It's not even about jobs anymore. It's about can you survive on the income you have? Many people are on pensions and Social Security. And here's the problem. When you do this to the currency, when you weaken the currency by effectively printing so much money, trillions, borrowing so much money, spending so much money by the federal government, you squeeze out the private sector, number one. Number two, it takes more dollars to buy the same thing as before. Number three, it takes more dollars to produce the same thing as before. Prices go up, the value of the dollar goes down. Prices go up, the value of the dollar goes down. And when you choke off the fuel that drives the engine of this economy, fossil fuels, for some imagined technology that's there tomorrow, it may be there one day, it's not there today, it's not there tomorrow, and you create shortages, and that's what's coming. Shortages. Hello, shortages of gasoline and oil. That's what's coming, not just high prices. What the hell do you think's going to happen to the economy? What does that have to do with private sector businesses causing inflation? Go ahead.
And millions of American workers won't get the raises they deserve. Republicans haven't wasted any time hammering Biden and Democratic lawmakers about inflation.
Skyrocketing inflation.
Inflation.
But don't fall for their fear-mongering.
Fear-mongering? Are people fear-mongering about inflation? I'll tell you something interesting. You know, we have a home in Florida. You can see this is the studio there in Florida. That's where I am. I was here a month ago. The price of regular gallon was $4.19. The same gas station, 3.5 weeks later, is $4.75. In 3.5 weeks, it went up almost 60 cents. Now, if you're on a fixed income, if you're earning minimum wage, or you're in the middle class, or you have 3, 4, 5 kids, and you have all these other expensive burdens, the price of food shooting up, the price of clothing shooting up. I mean, how do you make ends meet? This isn't some theory. This isn't some game. This isn't some opportunity to attack the private sector. The private sector didn't do this. Oil companies try to produce oil. Who do you think's applying for permits and leases? That is, leases to drill. And being turned down, it's the oil companies. You're in the business to sell oil, not to withhold oil. And they sold oil during Trump, and they have less oil now. And why would you invest a lot of capital in drilling for oil when they won't let you drill? And they're telling you your business is going to go out of business by 2050. How does that work? And what are we going to do with all these electric cars that these elitists in Washington and New York City and LA are telling you to buy at $100,000 a clip? You're going to plug them in? What's that going to do to the grid? You already have brownouts and blackouts in California, and there's now a warning. We're going to have shortages of fuel and brownouts and blackouts. How did that happen in 18 months? Because of corporations? Because of centralized companies?
For all this and much more, sign up for Levin TV.